Steven here, and welcome back to Apache Nifi. For today's video, we're going to be working with Nifi's processors for WebSocket. And before we get started on that, don't forget, if you haven't already and you're not new to the channel, take some time to hit that subscribe button below. It does help out the channel. And if you are new, consider hitting that subscribe button. That way you can use the notify function if you want to find out when new videos are posted online. All right, so WebSocket, where we have a processor group created here. So what the WebSocket can do for us is allow us to set up a Nifi WebSocket server, which then can receive connections from external sources. So say whether it's a website you have where you want to pass data from the website to Nifi, or maybe you have an application that's maybe collecting log data for you from something, and you want to establish that connection to pass that data through to Nifi as well. There's a couple of different use cases you can use it for. So let's go ahead and jump into our process group that we have set up here. And then let's go ahead and grab a couple processors, or our first processor. And in the list, when we type in WebSocket, we have connect WebSocket, listen WebSocket, and put WebSocket. The first one we're going to be working with today is going to be the ListenWebSocket. And as it says down below, acts as a WebSocket server endpoint. So this will be our endpoint and accepts client connections. And then it transfers flow files downstream to relationships according to received message types in the WebSocket server configured with the processor received client requests. We'll go ahead and grab that. Now, to make this work, we actually have to go and set up a controller service as well. So we'll go ahead and look at the WebSocket here. And inside of it, we have two options in the properties. We have our WebSocket server controller service that I just mentioned, and then we have a server URL path. So let's go ahead and take care of the WebSocket server controller, create a new one. And our option in the dropdown is the Jetty WebSocket server, which is what we're going to use. We'll create that. And then we'll go ahead and jump into it, configure it. The only thing we're going to configure here is the port that we are going to bind to and listen on for the server. The server will bind to the local host, and it will listen on this port. So in this case, we're going to be using 6980. We're not going to change it in the default buffers or max transmits and or max sizes and stuff like that. And we're not setting up a secure WebSocket. We're just doing a unsecured version of it. So we don't need to configure any of the SSL or any of the authentication roles and login services. We'll go ahead and apply that. And if it works correctly when we enable it, it should not give us a binding issue for the port, which it does not. We have no errors, so we're good to go. Let's go ahead and leave this. Go back into our processor for the listen. And now we have our server set up. So now Nifi has a server running that is listening to the WebSocket on port 6980. Now we need to set a URL path. And if we look at this, it's a URL path in which the processor listens to. It needs to start with a /. So this would basically kind of like a network connection that you create for a JDBC driver, where you have the IP address or the DSN name, you have colon, port number, /, and then in most cases you're putting the catalog name or the database name there. In this case, so we are going to put the path that we want this to go to. And let's call this one /chat. So maybe we're taking in a logs for a chat server or something, right? So that's going to be the endpoint. So this is our endpoint that we're in the path that we're going to listen to for this endpoint, which is the WebSocket or the listen WebSocket. So now we have this fully configured. Under scheduling, we don't need to mess with that. We want it to listen all the time. And let's take a look at the relationships we have here. So we have to do something with the binary message, the connected, and the text message. So we have two different types of messages that can be accepted, either the binary version or a plain text version. We're going to be messing with the text version. And we're also going to handle for connected. So what I find nice about this is, let's go ahead and leave here, right click on it, and go into view usage. We already talked about the properties. We looked at those relationships. And the other thing we see is when a flow file is created, we get some write attributes that are created as well with that flow file. We have a service ID, a controller service ID, the session ID, endpoint ID, local address, remote address, and the message type, which is text or binary. So what I wanted to do is every time your external application creates that WebSocket connection to the server and then to the endpoint, a connected flow file is always generated. It has no content in it, but it does have these attributes. So I'd like to use it as a way to create a log in a table and log the information here with the timestamp and log it to a table so I can keep track of the connections that are made to Nifi. And then I also want to handle for the text message or the messages that come in through the text message relationship. So let's go ahead and do that. First relationship we're going to work on then will be our connected relationship. Now, in order to get this going, the very first thing I know I wanted to go to then is going to be an attributes JSON processor, because I want to get those attributes. Go ahead and set up that relationship. And in the meantime, we can go ahead and terminate the other two until we're ready to work with them. Now, what would be really helpful at this point is actually being able to establish a connection externally and send data over to Nifi so that we can have an example flow file to work with and make sure that we're doing things correctly and setting up and handling for them. So the way I'm going to handle mine is on my local machine, because the server is not local to me. I'm going to set up inside of Visual Studio Code, I'm going to set up, use a script to create that connection and send a message over to Nifi and to this endpoint. So let's go ahead and jump over there. And as you can see, I already have the script I'm going to be using set up in a Python virtual environment, and it's ready to go. And just a couple of quick things about this. It's importing async IO, and it's importing WebSockets. That's what we're going to be using. And then you can see it's created, we have our produce here with the options that we're adding. So we have message string, host string, port, integer, and then we have our async. And the reason we're using this is because we're going to be sending a message and then waiting for a reply. And we'll get to that later too. And then we'll be looping through it. And you can see the message. I'm formatting it as a JSON string because I want to be able to work with it in JSON when I get it. You can see the host IP here, the port number, and I'm actually doing the / for the endpoint to chat up here. All right, so that should be ready to go. So what we should be able to do is run this. Oh wait, the log shows server rejected WebSocket connection HTTP 500. And there's a reason for that. Let's go ahead and jump back over to Nifi. And as you can see, we haven't started the ListenWebSocket. So because even though the server is up and running right now, because the endpoint is running, nothing's listening, so I can't get a connection established. So let's go ahead and start this. Now we can see it's running. Go back to Visual Studios. And inside of code here, we'll go ahead and start it again. Okay, this time it ran and it hasn't stopped running. Now we can go back over. Look at Nifi and see that we do indeed have a connected flow file in the queue. We'll go ahead and list that queue. Take a look at that flow file. As I said, it has no content to it. We'll inspect it, and then we'll take a look at the attributes. And there are the attributes we were expecting. The service ID, the endpoint, local address, remote address. So you can see for the local address, this is the server, which is running inside a Docker container. So that's why this is its name. Here's its IP address. Here's its port. And then my local machine IP address it came from, and then the port. and then the session ID, which will be very important later when we go to respond. All right, we're good there. Now, the next thing we need to do is, we know we have our attributes that we want. We want to take some of those attributes, write them into the content of a flow file, because we want to save this to a MySql database table. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up for content. And then let me grab a list of those attributes that I want to save. It's a comma separated list we need to put in here. I'll make sure those are the ones I wanted real quick. Okay, yep, there we go. So we have endpoint ID, local address, message type, and remote address. All right, so we look good there. Apply that. Now, the next thing we want to do is, well, we're going to write that to the content. So should be able to just go to the convert, right? Convert to JSON, or SQL, my bad. And we'll go ahead and do that. Success. Get that over here. All right, so now we should be able to pass the JSON or the flow file to the next one. We need to terminate the failure. Pass it on through. And go ahead and take a look at the content here. All right, so it's formatted, and as we can see, we have our JSON with the content of those attributes. So WebSocket message type, there is no message, so it's going to be blank for this one. But we do have our local, remote, and endpoint. And in this case, I opted not to save the session ID, because the session ID will basically be terminated every time, and I'm not worried about keeping that one over. Now, one thing I can see it's already going to be a problem is the fact that all the names are WebSocket.message.type or .local.address, and that's going to be a problem when I go to put it into my table, because my table doesn't have dots in them. It's just camel cased all the way through. So I need to handle and rename all of these to match the naming schema that I have for the fields in my table. So let's go ahead and take care of that. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this one here. And stop this one so we can get rid of that relationship. We'll go ahead and move it down here. I'm going to use a query record. Where to go? And oops. Okay, so set up this query record so I can work with things. I need a reader. And I have a JSON tree reader basic, which is really doesn't do anything, doesn't manipulate it, just reads it. And then I have a JSON set writer basic as well. And we can take a look at those just so you can see the writer. The only thing I'm doing to the writer is I'm doing one line for the output grouping because I'm not doing array. So that's all I'm telling it to do. All right, so back in there. And now we don't have a flow file. Now we might have the option if we wanted to, which is to go back here, look at the provenance, select it. Can we replay? No, we can't replay. Okay. So that's not an option to redo it. So the only option we have then is to resend a message from the Python script. So let's go look at that. And as we can see, Python is actually still running the script because it hasn't received a message back. So I'm going to jump over real quick and stop the processor for listen. We see we get an error now in Python because it was stopped on the other side and the connection was closed when I stopped the processor for the listen, for the endpoint. So that's good to go there. I'll make sure I restart it real fast. Off screen here, started. Now we can go ahead and send a new one. there we go. We're reconnected, and that should be good. So let's jump on over. All right, so we have our one new message now that came back through. We know we're ready for attributes, so we'll send that through. And that's good. So now we're ready to send it into a query record. So after the query record, we are going to go ahead and change it to an SQL statement. Oh, we need a query. Let's just do that, save that real quick so we can just make the connection. Oh yeah, forgot. Gotta put something in there. So this is going to be our query. Now, for this query, the way we're going to do it is really just take in the attributes. So we know the attributes are already part of the content. So now we just have to manipulate the content. And all we have to do for that is do like we would do in SQL, which is write it out and give it a new name. We're not making any changes. So that's how simple it is for here. Want to make sure you have those double quotes around it due to the periods. Could have issues. And now we can go ahead and establish that connection because it did save it this time. Get rid of our other two relationships by terminating them. And there we go. We're good to go. Start this one. All right, no errors. Let's take a look at it, make sure we got the intended output. And there we go. So it's all in string format, so that's perfect. And that's exactly what we're looking for here. Let's go ahead and leave this. So now we rename them. And now we can go ahead and set up our server in our put SQL so we can get them into a table. Now I've already used the same MySql server we've always been using for these examples, and I've set up a new database in there for WebSockets, and I've created the table that we're going to use. So let's go ahead and set up the config properties for this one. So MySql is what we're going to. This is a insert, and the table name for this one is connect log, and the catalog is WebSocket logs. And that's all we need to do here. Okay, handle for our relationships, forgot that. So I was wrong there. Okay, that's done. And then our put statement is set up as well. And we'll go ahead and set up the retry, terminate the failure, and the success. Okay, so we're ready to do that. Let's go ahead and send this one through. No errors there. And we need to make sure everything looks good. So I'm going to take a peek at the server real quick, make sure everything's running. We are running. All right, so let's go ahead and place that in there and see if it works. It went through. Now let's jump over to dbeaver. I would like to jump to dbeaver. So give me a second. Let me fix this. Ah, there we go. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. All right. So in dbeaver, let's go ahead and leave this. So we have already created the table. These are my two create statements I use for the table in this case. So the attributes that I wanted to save in here, I'm creating a auto-incrementing ID field for both my tables because we're going to do the not just connect log, but the message log as well. And that'll be the next step we work on. And then an insert timestamp so I know when we receive these messages. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. And we'll use the select all from WebSockets.connect log. And there we go. We have our message that came through. We have all the attributes that came through with that connect flow file. And we have a timestamp on it, so we know when we received it. So this is perfect. Now we have a log that we can use to keep track of these messages with. I'm going to jump back over now. And back over here. So that is us setting up our first flow for this. I'll zoom out here a little bit. And that takes care of handling for the connect route. And the next video, we're going to go ahead and set up the message route for text. And we'll go ahead and take that information in and log it into the server as well. So I'll catch you in the next video. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that like button down below. And like I said before, definitely hit that subscribe button. It definitely supports the channel a lot. And it's great to see that people enjoy the videos. I know to go ahead and keep making these. And I'll catch you next time. Have a good day.